All of my tests came back fine. They did all of the exclusionary tests that they do, testing for lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, different inflammatory conditions, and everything came back looking perfectly good. But when you look at your blood work and you have a doctor saying, you got a bill of good health right here, and you're thinking, yeah, I feel terrible. Something's not right. That's a challenge.
Cue music. Places, everybody, places. We're starting in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Autoimmune Hour, where we look at the rise of autoimmune disorders. I've brought together top experts that range from doctors, specialists, nutritionists, researchers, and even those recovering from autoimmune to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information about autoimmunity and how to live your life uninterrupted.
Thank you for joining us here on the Autoimmune Hour with Sharon Sayler. Always seek sound legal, medical, and or professional advice regarding any problems, conditions, and any of the recommendations you see, hear, or read here on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio. Join the Autoimmune Hour's Courage Club. Sign up now at understandingautoimmune.com. Now, back to your host, Sharon Sayler.
Welcome, everybody, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com, and as always, it's my pleasure to be with you here on another Autoimmune Hour. And tonight I have a great guest, a woman's 27-year of self-discovery and her journey through fibromyalgia. She's written a wonderful book called Fibromyalgia, A Journey of Self-Discovery. And it's fascinating to me about fibromyalgia. It's in that gray area of autoimmune, not autoimmune, but over 4 million adults have been diagnosed with it. That's according to the CDC. So to me, it's who cares what label's on it, right? But the number of those affected by it could be much higher. It's really a tough thing to diagnose. Oftentimes, the symptoms tend to fluctuate, and no two people, just like with autoimmune, no two people with fibromyalgia present the same way. And another thing I wanted to point out about fibromyalgia, just like autoimmune, and like I said, I think they're going to find out that they're closely related, if not related, estimated that 75 to 90% of those with fibromyalgia are women. Tonight we have Jenny Dunton, and she has been living with fibromyalgia for nearly 3 decades, and she believes the power of sharing her experiences to promote healing and to inspire and bring hope to those the most in need. And as I mentioned, she's written this really wonderful book called Fibromyalgia, A Journey of Self-Discovery. One of the things that she is just passionate about is just bringing comfort to those in isolation, because fibromyalgia, I have found, people that I know with it, can be quite an isolating autoimmune, much more than some of the others. So welcome, Jenny. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really great to be here.
Thank you. Now, tell me a little bit about how do you define fibromyalgia?
I'm going to start with the main 3 that doctors would actually diagnose fibromyalgia. Widespread body pain, meaning that you have pain in both the upper and lower quadrants. You have pain on both your left side and your right side, and you've endured that pain for at least 3 months. But in addition to that, the extreme fatigue is a major symptom, and in fatigue to the point where it's debilitating at times, where it's difficulty just to do the most basic life functions, such as convincing yourself that you have the energy to get out of bed to take a shower or just to make breakfast. And then there's the cognitive fibrofog is often what it is labeled for fibromyalgia, which is difficulty focusing, concentrating. Your memory starts to fade a little bit and you start to lose your train of thoughts, having difficulty finding words. But fibromyalgia is much, much bigger than those 3 key things. Fibromyalgia is like an umbrella word, just a diagnosis of a multitude of symptoms. There are a lot of secondary symptoms that go along with fibromyalgia. Many people have sleep disturbances. There are issues with sexual dysfunction sometimes, irritable bowel syndrome, headaches. So the list is quite lengthy. And once you get a fibromyalgia diagnosis, you find that there's this massive umbrella of primary and secondary symptoms.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of those symptoms people were checking off. That sounds like an autoimmune to me. Check, check. I hadn't heard fibrofog before, but I have heard brain fog, and I'm
Yeah.
assuming pretty similar.
Yep, same thing, absolutely same thing, just different term.
Okay.
And I agree with you. I think that doctors do argue whether or not it's an autoimmune disease. I shouldn't say argue. They discuss, and there's lots of research around it. And I think that down the line, it is going to come out that it is a form of autoimmune disease. It's just that maybe the autoimmune picture is much larger than we're giving it credit for or realizing at this point. Just because we don't know something now doesn't mean that we're not going to know it down the line.
Oh, absolutely. And I've often said, I don't really care what label you put on it, whether it's, are we saying fibromyalgia? Are we saying autoimmune? Are you saying lupus? It's a collection of symptoms. And the interesting thing I have found, and you mentioned in your opening there, was how everybody presents differently with their autoimmune diagnosis. So they get the label of perhaps fibromyalgia or lupus or something else. And yet, when you talk to two different people that have gotten that label, they can present very differently. And you're like, wow, they don't even seem to have the same issues going on. And yet they've got that same label. And I find that fascinating and also frustrating.
I do know when I was first given the diagnosis of fibromyalgia, there was a multitude of responses. My first was, oh, good. I have a diagnosis. I finally understand what's happening to me. This is progress. But quickly I realized that having a diagnosis of fibromyalgia really didn't mean a whole lot, didn't give me any information. And if anything, it unfortunately in many regards isolated me even more because fibromyalgia does have a bit of a stigma attached to it. That stigma is leaving as more research comes in and there's more evidence. That stigma of it being an invisible, all in your head, imaginary diagnosis is finally starting to disappear. But having a fibromyalgia diagnosis and the word fibromyalgia really doesn't mean anything.
That was frustrating to me was with the idea of the diagnosis of fibromyalgia and other autoimmunes. When a high percentage is women, it is often where we're dismissed. It's all in your head instead of actually listening to us and taking us seriously and the things that were happening to us seriously. And that's part of my frustration about getting well. And one of the reasons I got the Autoimmune Hour started was to talk about some of the other ways that we can expand our view of what's going on with us. Now, you, in the title of your book, you say 27 years. And that's a long time, nearly 3 decades, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
If someone was to say, okay, I was just diagnosed with fibromyalgia, what would your first tip be for them to settle into that realization without trauma? I think just hearing a diagnosis is traumatic, guys. I get that. But
I'm so glad you asked that question because it's why I wrote the book. Because I started participating in some support groups, some chronic pain support groups online. And I would see newly diagnosed patients asking the same questions over and over that I asked 30 years ago. And I would say my number one thing is if you've been given a fibromyalgia diagnosis, don't latch onto that. It is still so into the new stages of research and so much is coming out. The most important thing to do, I believe, is to slow down, become an active learner in your illness, which we should always do, right? I think it's amazing how we know so little about our bodies and until some major illness comes along, we really don't have a clue how it all works. And so I think that the number one thing that a newly diagnosed patient can do is not just trust that the doctors have the medication, the doctors are going to be able to provide you comfort. Yes, they will be able to some degree, but more importantly is to become an active learner in your illness and learn for yourself what's going on.
there's all sorts of ways to learn that. To me, it's not just about the diagnosis or whatever you read. Make sure it's peer-reviewed research. There are basic things that we can do as well. For me, taking the diagnosis in is excellent, reading about it, learning about it, understanding it. And yet also, as I think back, I entered a period after I digested the shock of my diagnosis and digested that, what that meant or might mean, and had the sadness and all of that dissipate, was stepping back and look, what are some basic health steps I can do that may not cause a recovery, but that was the ultimate goal. But what are some just basic health steps I can do to help support my health? Those were
Right.
some of the first questions I was asking of, okay, wow, bummer, I got this diagnosis. Let me step back and say, did I play a part in getting here? Like, reflect on your life and understand what part you're playing in it.
Right. And I think back to what the newly diagnosed patient, or even not the newly diagnosed patient, it really doesn't even matter that you're newly diagnosed, but I really learned how important having a cognitive behavioral therapist has played. And it comes from a line of, like you said, you're looking back on your life, you're thinking, how did this happen? What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? What is it, genetic? You start having all these questions, and it affects every aspect of our life. It affects our careers, it affects our relationships, and it's so much more than that 15-minute visit with our doctor. And I think that once I started really exploring on my own what possibly triggered this, it made me realize that a cognitive behavioral therapist could really help me walk through some of these difficult conversations with friends or with my spouse or with my boss, my careers. I think that I'm hoping that modern medicine takes us along a path where we not only have our general practitioner doctor, but we also have a behavioral therapist that is our core health team to help us get through these very isolating, difficult times so that we can learn more about ourselves and learn how to improve.
I'm curious. I've heard the term cognitive behavioral therapist, but I've never really researched it. How are they different from other therapists or health coaches, or what kinds of services would you expect from a cognitive behavioral therapist?
So much of fibromyalgia they're discovering now. Originally, it was thought that it had to do with just the muscles. It was a fibrous muscle tightening condition that caused widespread body pain. Now that we have better brain imaging and diagnostic tools, they're actually noticing that there are changes that are physically detectable and taking place in the brain. And a cognitive behavioral therapist is someone who can help you work with your nervous system, learn about how to calm your nervous system. They believe that a lot of fibromyalgia patients may be genetically predisposed. This may be in our genetics that we have something that when it gets triggered, we develop fibromyalgia symptoms. But it is also happening very much if we've had trauma or experienced illnesses, or if we've experienced a lot of stress. All of this is causing our fight and flight response system to constantly be engaged, and our brains are actually changing. So, having a cognitive behavioral therapist is someone who can help you to better understand your own emotions, understand what challenges you're experiencing going on in life, but also help to treat some of that past trauma that you might have experienced. There's no evidence that says that fibromyalgia can be reversed, but I am incredibly hopeful and I will die trying. And part of that will be to try to better understand what's happening in our brains. It is a brain dysfunction
I
based off of trauma or a car accident or extreme stressful situations where we're just living in a fight or flight response. And that creates inflammation in the body. And you end up experiencing this domino of symptoms because of that. So, a cognitive behavioral therapist can really help the patient cope.
And one of the things with autoimmune, and the more you're sharing with me about fibromyalgia, there's so many overlaps. So I can understand why, if people haven't put it in the autoimmune category yet, I could see that it could easily fit there, because dysautonomia or dysregulation of our autonomic nervous system is common in many autoimmune conditions. And working with the autonomic nervous system to relax and strategies around calming the nervous system are also part of healing from what they'll say categorized as an autoimmune condition. So there's plenty of overlaps we're discovering here as we chat.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, some research is saying that Hashimoto's being an autoimmune disorder, about 70% of patients, research is showing, has another autoimmune disease. For example, if you have a different autoimmune disease, you're more prone to develop fibromyalgia.
There's lots of research that if you have one diagnosis and you don't have a second one yet, you probably will. That's
And
something.
so that's where I'm okay. Let's try to be proactive. I'm not quite willing to accept that as a response, but it's very valid information. And I think the more we know upfront about what is going on, the more chance we have of potentially helping ourselves recover. And
I absolutely found that statistic horrifying, and that was my catalyst to do a lot of things that were helpful and but not technically medical. That's a little gray term. But as you
yeah,
mentioned, sleep hygiene, got better at scheduling my sleep and sticking to the sleep schedule and the bedroom without all the lights or the blue lights or the all sorts of things to make sure that it was supporting my health. Some people might say, well, that wasn't really autoimmune related, but diet and stress
right.
reduction and all of those types of things do support the underlying structure, because I don't want to be that statistic that gets the second, third, or fourth diagnosis.
No, exactly. Exactly. And you mentioned sleep and sleep hygiene, and that's just one more really critical, important thing with fibromyalgia. Sleep studies indicate that many patients that have fibromyalgia also have sleep disorders, whether it's insomnia. Many patients with fibromyalgia have sleep apnea, so they stop breathing when they're sleeping and often need a CPAP machine to help them stay in a restful sleep and not wake up multiple times throughout the night. And then another really interesting statistic you mentioned regarding that sleep hygiene, sleep is also an issue for fibromyalgia patients where we don't stay in REM sleep long enough. REM sleep is where we get our restorative rest. So it only makes sense that if we are cycling in and out of our sleep stages too quickly and not staying in REM long enough where we get our restorative sleep and we process all of the day's activities, if we're not staying in that stage long enough, we're going to wake up fatigued. So sleep hygiene is huge, and along with nutrition. I think that's been my biggest thing now that I am in my fifth decade of life. I fortunately am now at a place where I do have the opportunity to take that time for myself, where I can focus on my nutrition and all of that. I believe is so, so critical, and just keeping the body as healthy as possible.
Understanding the foundation, keeping the foundation strong, absolutely. I'll use the word seeps. That might be the wrong, too graphic a word, but helps the rest of the structure for sure.
Yeah.
Now, with fibromyalgia, do people tend to have a lot of things like food sensitivities and other things that are similar to people with other autoimmune diagnoses?
I've tried a lot of things. Like most people with autoimmune disease, we try the gamut of potential cures and things. For myself, and I am going to just say for myself, if there are food sensitivities, I haven't found them yet. What I think is the bigger issue is the gut permeability that people talk about, that we have a microbiome that is in our gut, and that's referred to now as our third brain. And if that micro gut biome isn't healthy in our gut, then we can have what's called leaky gut, and that's when toxins are releasing into your bloodstream. And those toxins can be causing that pain. It's part of that pain response. I believe there absolutely are fibromyalgia patients who have specific food allergies, but I think that's an individualized thing. But I do think the gut biome really plays a factor.
Helping our gut stay healthy is critically important to all of our health, whether we have been diagnosed or not. So, if you're listening in as a caregiver or something else like that, making sure that you keep your diet healthy and clean is important, and understanding the gut brain connection is really powerful. Because not only
Right.
does it cause pain, but that underlying inflammation if with the gut permeability. And one of the interesting things about me that I was thinking about was when I was first diagnosed, I had low level inflammation for a long time, and I'd had it for so long, I think I'd normalized it. Isn't that how we're all supposed to be? So being aware, especially newly diagnosed, how many of these things have you been just going, oh, old age, and since it's fibromyalgia and autoimmune tend to be more women, maybe you're going, oh, perimenopause, menopause. How many of these little symptoms have you been putting off to the point where you finally get this big word diagnosis and understanding, keeping track maybe of, oh my goodness, maybe I've been inflamed far longer than I think.
And I think that is what I really wanted to nail home to was just that low underlying inflammation. I absolutely normalized it. I don't know if I normalized it actually. It's more of a I brought it up to my doctors and they normalized it. And then so because they didn't really put much focus on it, I didn't put much focus on it. And then when I was in my mid 40s, suddenly I discover I have severe osteoarthritis in my knee and my toes. And then when I would go to a rheumatologist, they would tell me, wow. I mean, they'd say it a little bit nicer, but basically it was, wow, you have the joints of 70-year-old and you're in your 40s. So I think it's very important to try to figure out what is causing that inflammation and if there is anything you can do to try to tamper down the inflammation. It's going to be critical, if not now in your life when you're younger, so that you don't have early symptom onset.
I think inflammation is often overlooked not only by ourselves, but yes, poo-pooed by the doctors. And unless you've had inflammation, it's hard to know what it is. So I often say to a medical professional, if I feel like I'm being poo-pooed, say, have you ever had inflammation? Do you know what it really feels like to go out when you walk? Or
Right.
you're
Right.
just sitting there and you're just feeling tender everywhere?
Yeah, and I think that one of the toughest things with having early onset inflammation is with most autoimmune diseases and definitely with fibromyalgia, staying active and keeping moving is so critical. Just getting out for a short walk every day is so important, not only for our mental health, but there are chemical changes that are happening while we are out there exercising that are critical, but also just keeping our body healthy and our weight as balanced as we can. That inflammation has really caused a problem for me now that I'm in my 50s where walking is so excruciating. And it unfortunately, my favorite hobby and my favorite thing to do is to hike. So if we're not able to take care of the inflammation or find ways to manage that pain, we find that we're not as active, which exasperates the fibromyalgia symptoms. But you're also then really playing into the mental conditions, the emotional conditions that come with fibromyalgia. It becomes depressing. All of a sudden, your favorite hobbies that you love doing, that you're passionate about, that feed your soul. If we can let people be aware of that maybe a little bit earlier on, perhaps people can become more proactive. And I don't want to say that in a way that is condescending or making it sound easier than it is, because I know there are some things that we can't control, we don't know how to control, but we've got to try to do what we can for ourselves.
It's critical. I love what you said and how you said that because making sure that it doesn't become our identity. Sometimes people have their diagnosis and they incorporate it into themselves, tell themselves stories about, oh, I have to do this or I have to give up my walk or whatever. But what other ways can you find enjoyment, even if, yes, at that moment in time, maybe you have to give up your walk, but does that mean you have to give up walking permanently? Maybe not. So keeping an open mind and not letting the diagnosis, that label, become who you are. I always like to differentiate this idea of I have, and in your case, like I have fibromyalgia. I've told the story before, Jenny, but it's this idea of, okay, so an exterminator comes to my house and says, you have cockroaches. Okay, good information. Don't want them. Let's do
Right.
everything we can do to get them out of here, right? Is
Yeah.
totally different than this idea of I have, meaning ownership. I don't want ownership of that stuff over there. And I want people to be really clear on how they talk about who they are and how they are, and that they are not their diagnosis, that they can make choices to support their health and continue to live active lives, even if at times they can't do exactly what they are wanting to do or used to do.
Yeah, that's a really difficult thing, I think, for all of us to get used to. I had to reinvent myself so many times, and I think that's the trick is continually reinventing yourself. And when I say that, when I was in my 20s, when I was first diagnosed at 24, I was into rock climbing, whitewater rafting, kayaking. Bike. I was either bike riding or rollerblading to work every day. I was very active, and suddenly things changed, and I had to kind of changed my lifestyle. And that has evolved through the years where at one point I took up golf. I never thought I would golf, but that was something that I could do at one point. And then when I could no longer golf, then I went back to art. So we always have to have, I shouldn't say we always have to have, but it's always good to have hobbies and things that we can love and can grow to be passionate about just so we can really continue to understand how valuable we are and important we are, and not let our illness take away everything, because we still have so much to give. Even if our careers are affected or our relationships are affected, we still have value, and we need to redefine ourselves in order to really thriving and living. And I think, like you said, it's not as much of I have fibromyalgia. It's how do we live with these conditions? How do we live with an autoimmune disease that is life changing?
And understanding it's all about being adaptable. And
Yeah.
I often ask myself, I used to do certain things in my teen years, in my 20s and 30s. And I often ask myself, I wonder, would I still be doing those with or without the label now of the autoimmune? And I'm like, maybe not. I might
Yeah.
not have enjoyed rollerblading in my
Right.
as much as I did in my 20s. I don't know why, but I'm like, I'm not sure sometimes the choices I've made would be specifically related to my diagnosis either. So I have to kind
Right.
of but I still be that doing that exact same thing because I think of my friends without diagnosis and my friends, they're not doing what they did in their 20s either. So I don't know. It's a hard one to know what gave and what didn't give.
Yeah, I think we're forced into giving up some of those passions maybe a little bit earlier, a little bit younger than we would. I know that my former husband, he's in his 60s and he's still a rock climber. I don't think that would have been me. We have different levels of passion with those hobbies. The same thing, not with just hobbies, but also with our careers. I know my career had to evolve and change many times over the years to accommodate my needs with fibromyalgia.
The one thing I find in the autoimmune community here on the Autoimmune Hour is the people are so resilient and adaptable, and I can tell that's one of the lessons you've learned is
Right.
about being resilient and adaptable. Any thoughts about beyond what we've talked about in being able to be resilient? I think that's when people are often saying, "Ugh, I'm tired of being resilient.
Right.
I'm tired of adapting." What have you been able to do to keep going forward when you hit those points where you say, "Do I have to still be resilient?"
I think that on some days we just need to let ourselves rest, and we need to allow ourselves to have a bad day. I don't want to encourage that, but I think that anyone who has an autoimmune disease knows that we push through. We have to find that energy within us to go to that party. We want to go to the parties. We want to be social. We want to have different groups of friends and things like that. But I think that we do have to constantly adapt and change the way we think of our lives, and also give ourselves permission to take a rest day when we need to. It's been a very much so of a learning experience, and I wasn't always able to just accept it. I still am not 100% saying, okay, I have fibromyalgia and I'm going to have it for the rest of my life. I still want to hold out just a little bit of hope that with all this new brain imaging studies and things that are coming out, that perhaps the chemistry in our brain can change and we can get back some of our life. But I think for me, one of the most important things that I discovered along the path was how important the people that we choose to allow into our lives play a role. I, unfortunately, And I do say that with a lot of sadness because nobody wants a relationship to end. But I had 2 adult relationships and it makes me very sad, but I also realize that at some point we need to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And if we by chance have someone in our life who isn't understanding or supportive or makes us feel worse about ourselves, of course, we go through every effort we can to try to talk with them, to have conversations about it, maybe take them to doctor's appointment. But if all of that talking and if that person isn't able to participate with you on your path, then there is at times the need to reevaluate who we have in our life, and maybe they're not in our life anymore. Again, as sad as it is, I have to say that's what happened to me in my second relationship. And I realized that it was the best thing I could have done. Many tears, but it was the best thing I could have done for my health.
We've talked many times about boundaries, and I think that's one of the
Yeah,
things you're describing is like what's good for me. And oftentimes, just it's not about anything about the other person. It's just
right,
what's good for me, or it's not working for me here. Types
right,
of opportunities to say, "Oh, what's good for me." And that's not selfish. I've run into a lot of people with autoimmune and other long-term diagnosis. Oh, somehow they blame themselves, saying it's selfish that I had to take a day off, or I had to take a break, or I had to say no, or whatever. And I'm thinking, no, it's not selfish. Perhaps that thought process, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything, but I'm just thinking perhaps that thought process of doing so much might be part of what got you there. Who knows? Because I do think the more I work on myself and my own boundaries and my thought processes of being able to say no, I'm not up to it right now, and being okay
right.
with that, not having to explain, just being okay with no, I'm not up to it right now, or no, thank you, as simple as that. That took a lot of courage for me. I know it sounds silly, like Sharon, it took courage
No,
to say no, thank you, but it does.
no, and I think that again is something that my cognitive behavioral therapist was able to point out to me. I think many people, I'm not sure like in the whole arena of autoimmune, but with fibromyalgia, a lot of people who have it are that very empathetic person who wants to help people, who is a good listener. And we take a lot of the energy on that is all around us. And we, of course, we want to be working in our children's classrooms, helping out. We want to go to a live theater performance with our partner or to a live football game or whatever it may be. So we push and we push to please. We don't want to be the party pooper or the person who doesn't participate and have fun at social outings. So we go and we just push. And eventually our body just says, "Yeah, no, we're done. You may wanna push, but I can't push anymore, and we're gonna spend the day in bed." And I think that having our partners in our life understand that is so critical, and I think that for some relationships, it will work, and other relationships, it's not gonna work. And you should not, like you said, feel selfish about it because honestly, as they say, when you're on an airplane and the oxygen drops down, you need to put oxygen on yourself before you put it on your child because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your child. And there's a lot of truth to that. Although I do understand that it's often a lot easier said than done, especially when you're at a point where you are a young parent taking care of young children. You have responsibilities. You can't stay in bed. You need to go pick your kids up from school and they need dinner. So you need to get up out of bed and you need to go cook. But understanding it and coming to the realization helps.
And seeing both sides of it, I can understand how someone who hasn't experienced it doesn't have a clue what it feels like. I've been to medical professionals, and one particularly comes to mind when it was the first appointment. We were chatting, and I stopped in the middle of the conversation and I said, "May I ask a personal question?" She said, "Sure." I said, "The quality of your questions tells me that you have experienced at least something long term, if not autoimmune, or someone you know has. Is that true? And she says, I have an autoimmune. And there was a moment of relief because I knew she knew what I meant when I said a low level inflammation or a sporadic pain or whatever it was. It was a nice knowing. And it was also a realization to me at that moment that how could someone know what
Right.
it's like to have low level inflammation, head to toe, in your organs, everything else, or pain, or whatever, skin rash, whatever it is, unless you've actually been through it.
Because if you haven't actually been through it, you can't understand how yesterday you were vacuuming the house and doing the dishes, and today you're just flat out on the couch. How can you have such extreme extremes? If you haven't lived with it, it's very difficult to understand that. Which brings me to an actually really good and important part. One of my closest friends has multiple sclerosis. And I think having a support system, it doesn't need to be a friend necessarily who has an autoimmune disease, but I can't tell you how many conversations she shared with me and I've shared with her, and we see the overlap. And it's just that's exactly how I feel. Somebody who can really understand the everything that you're dealing with on a physical, emotional, and social level. And guilt. Do you think about the guilt we experience if we can't do enough, or the depression that comes in because we can't do what we used to do? Having a good support system and a good friend is very helpful.
And I like to call it in shows like this and podcasts that I listen to, as well as having a close personal friend. I have several. I like it confirming my sanity. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many times I've been poo pooed or told, no, that's not happening. Excuse me, it's happening.
It happened for me in real time, probably in my 30s, where fibromyalgia was still in a stage where a lot of doctors really did not believe it was real. And they kept saying my blood work came back fine.
It is a challenge, and one challenge is for me is I've blown past our commercial break here, so we'll hold that challenge thought until the other side. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com and, of course, UnderstandingAutoimmune.com. And we're here with Jenny Dunton, and she is the author of the wonderful book, Fibromyalgia, A Journey of Self-Discovery. And she's had fibromyalgia for nearly 3 decades. And in this wonderful book, she writes of her own experiences and all of the experiences of other people that she's had the opportunity to talk to, and some of the things that what it's like to live with fibromyalgia. I think it's a great book, not only if you have been diagnosed, but to share with family and friends. That way they can go, oh, maybe I get it. Now, Jenny, welcome back here. I think that's part of this helping other people understand what we're going through is critically important. But I want to take a left-hand turn because we only actually have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have time for it. So I'm going to go tangential on you here. And that's the types of medical treatment you sought out that you thought were the most helpful. I find that fascinating that people go the whole gamut. But what are some things that you found most helpful?
I think that it's very normal for all of us to start in our Western medicine doctor's office where we're being prescribed medication, thinking the doctor knows best, thinking that they can help us more than anyone else. But the fact of the matter, and it's not the doctor's fault, research hasn't gotten there yet. Um, there's only so much that doctors can do. And there is a multitude of other treatments that you can seek out that are very beneficial. For me, acupuncture has been amazing. Acupuncture offers me probably the greatest relief. It does not stay, meaning that I have to have constant repeat visits. It's not something that has changed for me and then it's, hey, I'm done. So, acupuncture, massage, meditation. And I can't emphasize meditation enough. I never saw myself as a person who thought that I could sit down and quiet my mind because I got a million things going on in that head. But when I learned to meditate, I was able to really feel what my body was feeling. I could feel different sensations, and I learned to really quiet my mind. And so I think with acupuncture, massage, meditation, a lot of those Western approaches, in addition to diet and supplements, there are certain supplements that we can give ourselves. are all critical. The problem is that often our healthcare does not pay for those services. And many people,
True.
right. And many people who have autoimmune diseases are on a very strict budget, or in my case, on disability, and you don't have those extra expenses to go pay for those things. So it's my hope that our healthcare systems will eventually change and we'll have more of a full body functional medicine approach to taking care of the autoimmune patient.
I'll say patients in general, if I
Well,
can.
true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because oftentimes there's more than just take this and you'll feel better, that oftentimes it takes a multi-pronged approach. And I'm a fan of acupuncture myself. I find it's been extremely helpful. You're right, it doesn't stay, but gosh, it sure brings nice relief. Now, I have other people who say it didn't work for them. It's to me, it's I like to call it sort of medical whack-a-mole, and sometimes it's treatment whack-a-mole. For you, maybe it doesn't work for you.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I really hesitate to get on all of this conversation. I know a lot of people do ask about medications and things that people take, and I don't like to even get into that conversation because I do feel that it really is very personalized, and you do have to go through that trial and error approach to figure out what is going to work for you. But I do think for me, the alternative methods have been just as helpful or more helpful, and they've given me a lot of my power back. Having the power to and control over my life, feel like I'm still in charge here. There's a lot to be said for that.
Absolutely. Now, I know in your book you bring up functional medicine. You want to talk about that for just a couple of minutes so we can describe to people what functional medicine is? It's becoming more and more popular. I know it's been around for a few decades, but it's actually becoming more and more popular and easier to find functional medicine practitioners.
Yeah, again, we do run into that problem of our insurance systems needing to get on board with that. But I think that the more that people can speak out and talk about what really helps them, perhaps it'll have influence on the future going forward and in healthcare. Functional medicine is treating the whole body, not just one specific thing.
The things I loved about functional medicine is how they took my history beforehand. And I had this odd awakening in functional medicine where they took the history and I could see how I got here. Now, I wish I had that ability with binoculars to see it back then. It was extremely helpful to see that because then I could make different decisions now that maybe were decisions that maybe I should have made then. But that wasn't about beating myself up or anything, community. That was just that I found it fascinating, and treating the whole body was helpful because all too often in Western medicine, you go to so many specialists and maybe they don't talk. Luckily, I'm so
Right.
happy that I've got a team where they all talk to each other. But oftentimes, the dermatologist doesn't have time or know your rheumatologist.
I'm really happy that, at least a lot of medical records are now able to be shared, but between doctors, at least, that's a huge improvement and start. But the communication between doctors has always been an issue. I felt, gosh, if my rheumatoid arthritis doctor was talking to my pain management doctor, and my pain management doctor knew what was going on with my neurologist, and the different specialists, that I could be treated differently. I think that is something we can do as a patient, since we're not quite there yet with a lot of functional medicine being fully in place and developed. We can still have a hub. For me, my general practitioner, like many people, is the hub. And then we have specialists that sort of branch out from there. And if we can have those specialists keep our general practitioner informed, then we're going to get a better full body care approach, because at least that person understands the whole you a little bit better. And
Absolutely. We had Bill Potts on, five-time cancer survivor on uh, and one of his things, which I started doing but late, he started doing from his first diagnosis, was actually keeping files himself. And I'm thinking of how nice that would have been. And so if you're just newly diagnosed, keeping your own files, whether they're paper or some other version, but it's so easy to think, "Oh, I'll remember this because it's a big, important moment in my wellness journey," or something like that, and I don't know about you guys, but I thought I'd remember it just like I thought I'd remember some big event in my kid's life. Yeah, a few decades later, no.
Yeah. And, I think that's really important too, because with those autoimmune diseases, they are going to be hereditary potentially. So keeping track of those notes can really help future generations that are in our life.
Absolutely. Any of those sorts of things for sure.
And anything that we can do to help the people in our future generations in our life, maybe cut some steps here would be hugely beneficial.
And that's why I love doing the show, is helping people understand there's more than just one way to get well. And in fact, I suggest that you incorporate many ways to get well and define what well is for you. There's always hope for new things and new opportunities and new discoveries. We're in an amazing time now where finally autoimmune's being talked about. When I
Right,
was first
right.
thinking that I had something wrong decades ago, that wasn't even a term. Now it's they're finding, I forget the number, hundreds of things that they're putting into that autoimmune and the immune system and the autonomic nervous system playing not so nice with this. And Jenny, we're just about out of time. Share any final thoughts, and then where can we find your wonderful book?
At first, I like to just say that I want everybody to have hope. I am so excited that there are people like you that are creating a community where those of us with autoimmune can go. It's so empowering to know that there are others out there talking about their stories. And that was a huge motivation for me. It's an incredibly isolating situation to live with autoimmune. And I think we need to surround ourselves with hope and people that can support our healing and help us to find the best way to move forward in our lives and live a full life. And also to feel empowered to know that it's okay to speak up for ourselves. We need to have boundaries in our lives. We need to not feel guilty for taking care of ourselves.
Mhm.
And I would love it if anybody is interested in reading my book. It does tell my story through the 27 years from age 24 to current. It takes readers through my experiences with careers and reinventing myself, through the loss of love, and through divorce and child rearing. So I think that many of us live very similar stories, and we just live in different words. And the more that we share and talk about those experiences, the better we're all going to be.
Absolutely. I love to say here on the show, you're not alone. And some people take that a little negatively, and I'm not. It's not about that. It's about knowing, as I said before, confirming your sanity. Yes, what you're going through is real, and there are people who have gone through it or are going through it that are here to support you, just like Jenny and myself. So, everyone, be sure and get Jenny's book. It's called Fibromyalgia, A Journey of Self-Discovery. Now, is it available online at all?
It's available on Amazon through Kindle or Amazon paperback,
Okay.
and it's easy to look it up there. And yeah, I hope that it provides people with not only comfort and my story, but also it's backed with a lot of research, scientific research, only from peer reviewed medical journals, since I myself am not a doctor.
Right, I'm not a
But
doctor, and I
yeah,
don't play one on the podcast either.
no,
This
no,
is Jenny.
yeah.
Everyone, that's Jenny Dunton. Thank you so much, and have a great week, whatever your adventures. Join us next week for another brand new episode.
Thank you.
Enjoy. And if you're here on YouTube, please be sure and click the subscribe button below and hit the little bell to get notifications for when we upload new episodes and new clips and other amazing things I find. We're trying to grow our YouTube community here so we can offer help and hope to as many people as possible. And thank you for being part of our Autoimmune Courage Club community.
The information provided on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, including the websites understandingautoimmune.com and lifeinterruptedradio.com, plus social media, is for educational purposes only. What you read, hear, and see on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, and its websites, and other media outlets is based on experience only. The information should never be used for any legal, diagnostic, or treatment purposes.